You have never had a single original thought. Everything you believe, everything you rage against, was planted deliberately. You were taught how to think, how to feel, how to respond. And the worst part? You thank them for it. Machiavelli knew this game better than anyone. Control wasn't about chains or prisons. It was about shaping the mind so perfectly, so quietly, that the prisoner never realizes he's been caged. You call it freedom, but it's only well-designed obedience. And until you see that, you will never be free. There is no greater illusion than freedom in a world built on control. From the moment you were born, a system began carving itself into your thoughts. It didn't need violence. It didn't need blood. All it needed was repetition, rules dressed as morality, lies told with a smile. And the genius of it? You thought you were choosing. You thought you were in control. But you were only ever reacting, following paths others paved for you. Machiavelli understood that physical power was temporary, unstable. A king can be killed. A tyrant can be overthrown. But if you take control of the mind, if you infiltrate belief systems, social codes, words, dreams, then control becomes permanent, invisible, self-sustaining. You don't need armies when the people start marching on their own. You don't need cages when they've already locked themselves in. He called it the necessary illusion, the art of ruling minds without ever appearing to rule at all. He knew that fear alone wasn't enough. Fear fades. But belief? Belief is viral. It spreads through schools, through media, through whispers at dinner tables. A well-trained mind becomes its own warden, punishing itself for questioning the script. The moment you say, "This is just the way things are," you've surrendered. You've handed your thoughts to the architects. You wear the chains with pride now. You call them values. You call them traditions. You call them normal. But they are only rules crafted by those who benefit when you follow them blindly. The true prison doesn't need bars. It needs structure. It needs guilt. It needs identity. Once they teach you who you are, you will defend your prison like it's a castle. Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in deception. It was in clarity. He saw the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And what he saw was this: if you want to rule a man forever, don't break his body, break his mind. Make him love his servitude. Make him fight to protect it. And if he ever starts to wake up, remind him that comfort is better than truth. Remind him that questioning is dangerous. Remind him that obedience is noble. That is how the system survives. That is how the prison stays locked. And most will never notice the door was open the entire time. Machiavelli understood something most men never will. You do not need to destroy a man to control him. You only need to make him doubt himself. The body is resilient. It adapts, it heals, it resists. But the mind, once cracked, rarely repairs. That is why the most effective rulers never raise their voice, never spill blood, never show the whip. They simply whisper uncertainty. They make you question your worth, your instincts, your decisions. And soon, you begin doing their work for them. You start policing yourself, silencing yourself, apologizing for simply existing. This is how control begins, not through force, but through erosion. The slow grinding away of confidence until all that remains is compliance dressed as humility. Machiavelli called it the art of soft domination. He knew that fear creates rebellion, but doubt creates obedience. A man who fears you may one day fight you, but a man who doubts himself will never try. He becomes harmless, predictable, manageable. It is the perfect form of control because it hides behind virtue. You are told to be humble, to listen, to learn, to obey. But what they really mean is, surrender your judgment. Stop trusting your own mind. Trust theirs instead. That is how empires are built, not on stone, but on submission. Every system, every religion, every government has used this law. They do not crush you, they convert you. They reward you when you stop thinking and punish you when you question. The more you comply, the more good you appear. The more you resist, the more dangerous you become. And so you begin to shape yourself into the image they prefer, convincing yourself it was your idea. You become the sculptor of your own chains. This is the brilliance of psychological control. It feels moral. It feels right. You don't see yourself as oppressed. You see yourself as righteous. You call it discipline. You call it loyalty. But it's only obedience dressed in purpose. Machiavelli wrote that, to rule without resistance, you must master the illusion of consent. You make people believe they chose the cage. You make them think submission is wisdom. Once they do, their will collapses. And when the will collapses, the body follows. That is why the controlled mind never revolts. It prays, it votes, it obeys. It feels proud for being compliant. It kneels and calls it peace. Every tyrant understands this secret weapon. Break the will, not the body. Shatter confidence, not bones. The wounds of flesh will heal, but the scars of the mind become permanent. When a man loses faith in his own thoughts, he becomes property. He is ruled, not by another's hand, but by his own fear. And once he accepts that fear as truth, he will never need a master again, because the master will live inside him forever. A lie repeated long enough no longer feels like deceit. It becomes the air people breathe. Machiavelli understood this long before the printing press, before propaganda had a name. He knew that truth was fragile, but belief was indestructible. People don't want truth, they want certainty. And if a lie offers comfort, they will defend it with their lives. This is the foundation of every empire built on control. Give the people a familiar illusion and let them call it reality. It does not matter whether it is a flag, a faith, or a slogan. Once a mind believes, logic becomes irrelevant. The repetition of falsehood turns into rhythm, and rhythm becomes hypnosis. You begin to sing along without realizing the song is not yours. Machiavelli wrote that the crowd does not see the world as it is, but as it is described to them. And so, the powerful learned to describe it carefully. They crafted narratives that told you who to love, who to fear, who to blame. Each repetition buries the original truth deeper, until the lie feels sacred. The people forget when it began. They only remember that it feels right. That is how a falsehood becomes a moral code. You defend it, you teach it, you pass it to your children. Generations later, the lie no longer needs a ruler, it enforces itself. The greatest trick of power is not censorship, it is saturation. Tell the same story 1,000 times until no other story can exist. Drown the truth under the noise of repetition. Every headline, every post, every conversation becomes a chorus. And when the chorus is loud enough, no one dares to sing another tune. You start to question yourself instead of questioning the world. You think, if everyone believes it, maybe I'm the one who's wrong. That is the moment control is complete. You surrender not because you are forced to, but because you want peace. You want to belong. And so, the lie wins not through strength but through comfort. Machiavelli warned rulers to never underestimate the power of familiar deceit. It is safer to rule through stories than through swords. Blood provokes rebellion, but stories create devotion. They turn slaves into believers, and believers will defend their chains as if they were treasures. Once a man adopts a lie as his identity, you can take everything from him except his delusion. He will go to war for it, die for it, and call it honor. That is why the controlled mind cannot be freed by argument. It must be shaken awake by suffering. Only when the illusion begins to crack, only when comfort turns into confusion, does the truth have a chance to breathe again. But by then, most refuse to see it. They would rather live inside a beautiful lie than face an ugly truth. And that is how the world stays ruled by repetition, by comfort, by the familiar lies we choose to believe. Control never begins in the mind, it begins in the gut. Machiavelli understood that people do not move because of logic, they move because of emotion. Rage, fear, pride, shame, these are the real levers of power. A ruler who tries to control reason will always fail. But a ruler who learns to manipulate feelings can move entire nations with a whisper. Logic is slow, uncertain, fragile. Emotion is immediate. It does not wait for evidence. It reacts. And those who react are easy to direct. That is why every powerful system trains the emotions first. From childhood, you are taught not just what to think, but how to feel about it. You are told what to love, what to hate, what to laugh at, what to fear. You think your reactions are yours, but they were carefully planted. Machiavelli knew that if you can attach fear to freedom, people will run from it. If you can attach pride to obedience, they will chase it. And if you can attach shame to rebellion, they will turn against their own instincts. The emotional mind becomes the leash. You do not need a cage if the prisoner is terrified of what lies outside it. This is why tyrants do not waste time debating truth. They flood the people with symbols, flags, songs, enemies. They stir feeling, not thought. Because when the blood rises, the mind shuts down. It is not about what is right, it is about what feels right. And when fear takes hold, even lies feel like safety. A dictator is not feared because he argues well. He is feared because he makes you imagine pain. He knows that pain, real or imagined, is the strongest teacher. People will betray their values to avoid it. They will abandon their conscience to escape it. That is the power of emotion. It does not need to prove anything. It only needs to be felt. And once it is felt, it becomes law. Machiavelli wrote that a leader must appear rational, but must act upon emotions. Because the people do not follow wisdom, they follow confidence, they follow strength, they follow the one who makes them feel something, anything. In silence, they crave noise. In chaos, they crave order. The emotional ruler gives them both, in cycles, until they can no longer tell the difference between stability and submission. The genius of control is not to silence logic, it is to drown it. Make the people feel so much that they forget to think. Flood their senses until analysis becomes exhaustion. When they are tired, confused, overwhelmed, that is when they obey. Not because they believe, but because they want peace. And in that surrender, they give you the one thing that matters more than loyalty. They give you access to their emotions. And once you own that, you own them entirely. There was a time when silencing a man meant cutting out his tongue or dragging him to the gallows. But Machiavelli understood a more refined method, one that left no blood, no martyr, no monument. He knew the most dangerous men in any society were not the rebels with swords, but the thinkers with questions, the ones who saw the cracks in the system, the ones who spoke truths that could not be unsaid. And yet, rather than kill them, he believed in something far more effective. Offer them comfort, reward their talent, wrap them in velvet, and invite them to dinner. Make them feel seen, valued, respected. And slowly, their fire will dim, their voice will soften, their questions will become suggestions, their rebellion will become rhetoric. That is how you silence a threat, by turning it into decoration. The prophet becomes a puppet, the revolutionary becomes a professor, and the crowd cheers, unaware that the flame has already died. This is the brilliance of soft suppression. You do not destroy the opposition, you absorb it. You give them platforms, prizes, positions. You flatter their ego until it becomes their leash. And once they've tasted comfort, they fear losing it more than they ever feared your power. They censor themselves. They rewrite their message. They sell diluted truths for polite applause. And the public follows, believing the voice of truth is still alive, when in fact, it has been bought. Machiavelli wrote that it is far more useful to corrupt a critic than to condemn him, because a condemned man becomes a symbol, a corrupted man becomes a tool, and the masses will always listen to a familiar voice, even if that voice now whispers lies. The system survives not by crushing the loudest voices, but by making them manageable. If a man once spoke fire, but now delivers ash, few will notice. They will nod, they will clap, they will forget he ever challenged anything. This is the fate of most thinkers, not execution but integration. They are invited to speak as long as they say nothing new. They are celebrated as long as they don't make anyone uncomfortable. They are praised for being bold, as long as they never go too far. And so the cycle continues. The people believe they are hearing the truth, but they are only hearing echoes of what is allowed. This is how the powerful win, not through fear, but through flattery. Not by silencing voices, but by softening them. And once the thinkers are tame, the people are blind. They accept the silence. They follow the softened prophets. And the real truths, the dangerous ones, are buried beneath applause. Machiavelli didn't need to kill the revolution. He only needed to make it comfortable. And in doing so, he proved that the greatest weapon against truth is not censorship. It is seduction. One of Machiavelli's most subtle weapons was the illusion of choice. He knew that people will accept almost any condition, any cage, as long as they believe they chose it. So he devised a strategy not of force, but of framing. You do not need to control every decision. You only need to control the options. Offer two paths, both of which lead to the same destination. Let the people argue, protest, and fight over which is better. Let them believe their voice matters. Let them vote. But make sure both candidates answer to the same master. This is not freedom. This is theatre. And the audience claps while their minds are being led. It is a brilliant mechanism because it disguises submission as participation. The people believe they are in charge. They feel empowered. But they are only choosing the color of their own collar. This is how empires evolve, not through obvious tyranny, but through carefully structured decisions. You are not told what to do. You are told to pick between A and B. You are not forced into silence. You are given platforms, but only within boundaries. You are not censored outright. You are drowned in noise until your voice disappears, and all the while you feel free. Machiavelli understood the psychology of control. He knew that rebellion thrives when people see their chains. But if you paint those chains with the colors of identity, patriotism, or progress, the people will wear them proudly. They will even defend them. The key is to never take everything. Leave just enough so that they believe they have something to lose. That belief is the hook. That illusion is the leash. Give them bread, but never ownership of the oven. Give them a voice, but never a seat at the table. Let them speak, but not too loudly. Let them run, but only in circles. This is not oppression as the world used to know it. It is not violent. It is not crude. It is elegant, polite, even democratic. And that is what makes it powerful. Because you cannot rebel against what you do not recognize as control. You cannot fight what you believe you chose. This is the genius of structured freedom. It satisfies the ego while starving the soul. And by the time the people begin to sense the trap, they are too exhausted to care. They defend the system that cages them because they remember choosing it. But it was never their choice. It was the choice they were given. And that is the sharpest trick of all. Not to force obedience, but to package it as autonomy. Machiavelli didn't need to take power. He simply taught rulers how to offer it back emptied, wrapped in pride, and sold as freedom. Machiavelli feared one thing more than rebellion: boredom. A bored mind becomes dangerous. It begins to wander, to question, to notice. And the moment a man begins to notice, he begins to awaken. That is why the true rulers of society do not simply police behavior, they police attention. They flood the senses. They drown the silence. They do not want the people thinking. They want them scrolling, arguing, laughing, consuming. It is easier to control a distracted population than an enlightened one. So they built a world where the mind is never still. Entertainment became the leash, and distraction became the drug. You are surrounded by noise, endless shows, flashing lights, curated outrage, shallow victories. The circus never ends, because the show is not for your joy, it is for your compliance. If you are busy, you are harmless. If you are entertained, you are asleep. The most brilliant part is that it feels good. The brain craves stimulation. It hungers for novelty. So they feed you just enough to keep you coming back, but never enough to fill you. You are not satisfied. You are sedated, and while you laugh, the world is carved around you. Laws are passed, systems are built, powers shift, and you do not see it. Not because you are blind, but because your eyes are too busy watching someone else's story. Machiavelli knew that a man cannot fight a system he does not understand, and he cannot understand it if he never looks up. This is not censorship in the traditional sense. It is not the burning of books or the silencing of voices. It is the dilution of meaning. It is the burying of truth under a mountain of triviality. There is always something newer, louder, faster, and the mind, overwhelmed, forgets what mattered. Attention is finite, and those who control it control everything. They do not need to tell you what to believe. They only need to keep you too distracted to care. Feed the masses spectacle. Give them artificial stakes. Let them feel like they are winning, losing, choosing, but never let them feel silence. Because silence breeds thought, and thought breeds questions, and questions, real questions, are fatal to control. That is why every regime, every system of dominance invests first in entertainment. Bread and circus, distraction and dopamine keep the mind full so it never empties itself, because an empty mind will eventually ask, who benefits from my silence? Who profits from my attention? And once those questions begin, the spell starts to break. That is why the screen must always stay on. That is why the music must never stop. Machiavelli didn't just write about war or strategy, he understood psychology. He understood that if you can entertain the people, you never have to oppress them. They will stay in the cage, eyes glued to the illusion, believing they are free because they are amused. The strongest chains are forged from within, not iron, not law, but guilt. Machiavelli knew that a man who feels guilty is easier to control than one who feels afraid. Fear is temporary. Guilt lingers. It crawls into the soul, rewrites your identity, and convinces you that punishment is not just deserved, it is righteous. That is why the most powerful rulers do not threaten you. They simply remind you of your failures, your flaws, your sins, and they do it so subtly that you start to believe it was your idea. You begin to see your suffering as earned. You confuse your shame with morality, and slowly you adjust your behavior, not out of fear, but out of a desperate need to cleanse yourself. This is how guilt becomes a weapon. You feel dirty for wanting freedom. You feel selfish for questioning authority. You feel dangerous for thinking independently, and so you punish yourself. You shrink, you stay silent, you surrender your voice because you've been taught it is too loud. You surrender your strength because you've been told it hurts others. Machiavelli saw that the most obedient slaves are the ones who believe they are wrong for wanting more. Once a man internalizes guilt, he becomes his own jailer. He corrects his tone, he censors his words. He watches himself in mirrors of imagined judgment. He doesn't need to be controlled, because he already controls himself. This is why every lasting system of power builds a moral code that condemns human instincts. Desire becomes sin, anger becomes violence, pride becomes arrogance. You are told to be soft, to be small, to be ashamed, and the more you obey, the more praise you receive. Not for who you are, but for what you suppress. You become a reflection of what they want you to be, never who you truly are, and the cost of authenticity becomes too heavy to carry. So you trade it for belonging, for peace, for acceptance, and guilt becomes the toll. Machiavelli didn't need to threaten punishment. He knew it was far more effective to teach people to punish themselves, to tie their worth to obedience, to measure their goodness by how much they deny themselves. In time, the people beg for their own submission. They ask to be corrected. They welcome shame as a path to virtue. And in doing so, they lose the only thing that ever made them free, the ability to trust their own instincts. The greatest act of control is to make someone hate the parts of themselves that resist control, because once that hatred takes root, you will never need force. They will hand over their power willingly, tear it from their own hands, and smile as they do it. Not because they were told to, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. That is the power of engineered guilt, and it does not fade. It stays, it spreads, it thrives in silence, and it wins. Every time. Words are not just sounds. They are weapons, levers, chains. Machiavelli knew that to control a man's world, you must first control his language, because language is the frame through which all reality is seen. Change the words, and you change the meaning. Change the meaning, and you change the mind. You do not need to ban ideas if you can rename them. You do not need to hide the truth if you can twist the words that describe it. This is not censorship, it is redefinition. War becomes peacekeeping, lies become narratives, slavery becomes security. And once the new word is accepted, the old reality disappears. People stop questioning not because they agree, but because they no longer have the vocabulary to resist. When the language is manipulated, dissent becomes confusion. The tongue stumbles, the thought gets lost, the rebellion fades before it begins. This is how the mind is tamed, not with chains, but with edits. Machiavelli would have smiled at how modern power rewrites the dictionary, not with fire, but with culture. He understood that control over language is control over imagination. If you cannot describe injustice, you cannot fight it. If you cannot name freedom, you cannot chase it. So the first act of dominance is to rename the battlefield. Make words like strength sound dangerous. Make words like submission sound noble. Make rebellion sound insane. Over time, the people learn to distrust their own instincts because their instincts no longer align with the language they've been given. They feel something is wrong, but cannot explain why. So they say nothing, and silence is victory for those who rule. Words are how you remember. Words are how you transmit wisdom, rage, hope. Destroy the words, and you destroy the memory. Once a generation grows up using only the new vocabulary, the old truths vanish without a trace. That is how control becomes permanent. Not through violence, but through cultural surgery. You erase the past, not by burning it, but by renaming it. You soften tyranny with new phrases. You blur clarity with cleverness. You weaponize words until no one knows what anything means. And in the chaos of meanings, power consolidates. Because the people are too busy debating definitions to notice who is holding the leash. Machiavelli believed the ruler's greatest tool was not the sword or the coin, but the pen. Not the laws themselves, but the language they are written in. Once you master words, you master perception. And once you master perception, you can bend reality without ever lifting a finger. That is the secret of the controlled mind. It does not fight, because it does not see the war. It does not scream because it has no word for pain. And it does not run because it believes the cage is a sanctuary. Change the language, and you change the world. Not by force, but by consent. Machiavelli never feared the strong. He respected them. But he understood they were a threat not because of their muscle, but because of their mind. The strong ask questions. They resist shame. They trust themselves even when the world turns against them. That kind of mind cannot be ruled, it must be isolated. So the system does not fight strength directly, it redefines it. It calls strength arrogance. It calls confidence toxicity. It turns leadership into aggression and independence into selfishness. Slowly, the strong are pushed to the edges. They are labeled dangerous, problematic, unfit. Meanwhile, the weak are rewarded. They are praised for their obedience, celebrated for their fragility. They are called empathetic, sensitive, enlightened, not because they are powerful, but because they are easy to manage. And in a world that seeks control, weakness becomes the standard. The system learns to uplift those who will never question it. It gives them platforms, pity, power, but only the kind of power that maintains the illusion, never the kind that threatens it. This is how strength is neutralized, not by battle, but by distortion. The children grow up watching the bold get punished and the submissive get praised, and so they adapt. They become quieter, softer, more agreeable, not because it is right, but because it is safe. They shrink themselves to fit the mold that guarantees survival, and in doing so, they become perfect citizens for a system that fears resistance. Machiavelli understood that if you want to rule forever, you do not crush rebellion. You prevent it from forming, and the best way to do that is to invert the moral code, make people ashamed of their strength, make them afraid of their voice, make them doubt their instincts, and when they do, they no longer pose a threat. They become cogs in a machine they will never question. They become defenders of their own diminishment. This is not a war against violence, it is a war against vitality. The energy that fuels revolution is buried beneath layers of guilt, noise, and fake virtue. And by the time a strong mind begins to speak, it finds itself alone, surrounded by silence, condemned by the very people it hoped to awaken. That is how control sustains itself not through force, but through strategic loneliness. Divide the strong, isolate the thinkers, surround them with those too afraid to stand beside them, and eventually, even they will bend, not because they believe in the lie, but because they are tired of standing alone. That is how empires keep peace, not by eliminating the strong, but by making them irrelevant. And Machiavelli knew, once the strong are silenced and the weak are worshipped, the game is over. Control has won. Control thrives in chaos. Machiavelli understood that the surest way to rule a people was not by uniting them, but by dividing them first. Unity, when it comes from the people, is dangerous. It creates momentum, common ground, shared vision, but division that is manageable, that is predictable. So the first step is to fracture them. Split them by class, by color, by creed, by cause. Feed each side a different narrative. Give them different enemies, different slogans, different wounds. Make them feel separate. Make them feel threatened. And then watch. They will turn on each other. They will police each other. They will silence, shame, and destroy each other without the ruler ever lifting a hand. That is the brilliance of division. It redirects rage away from power and toward the neighbor. People will march in the streets and never notice who built the cage. They will scream at each other and never see who holds the leash. Because when you are busy defending your tribe, you stop asking who benefits from the fight. Machiavelli knew the answer. The ruler does. The architect of the chaos always does. Because in a divided world, peace becomes a product. And once you are tired of the noise, the fear, the violence, you will beg for order. You will welcome the hand that offers safety, even if that hand is the one that caused the disorder to begin with. This is the second act of the play. After division comes false unity, the promise of peace on their terms, but only if you obey, only if you comply, only if you forget what made you question in the first place, and most will, because the pain of conflict is heavy, and the illusion of peace, even if hollow, feels lighter. So the people surrender, not because they are defeated, but because they are exhausted, and in their exhaustion they confuse silence for harmony. But silence under control is not peace, it is permission. Permission for the system to grow, unchecked. Permission for the architects to erase what remains of rebellion. This is how control perfects itself. It breaks the people apart, then sells them unity through obedience. And they take it. They always take it. Because the deeper the wound, the sweeter the lie of healing sounds. Machiavelli didn't just study war, he studied the peace that follows. He knew that forced unity is the final stage of control, not the beginning of freedom. Once the people are divided, once they are desperate, once they are worn down by their own infighting, then, and only then, do you offer the solution, and that solution becomes the final cage, wrapped in flags, signed in law, celebrated by the very people it imprisons. The most dangerous ruler is not the one who commands fear, it is the one who reflects your desires. Machiavelli understood this with surgical precision. He wrote not for tyrants who ruled with the sword, but for those clever enough to rule with the mirror. People are not loyal to power. They are loyal to what they see of themselves inside that power. If you want to control them, do not force them to follow you. Make them want to. Show them their dreams in your smile, their fears in your enemies, their identity in your flag. And once they see themselves in you, they will no longer see you at all. They will see only what they wish to believe. That is the trick. You do not lead with commands. You lead with reflection. Let them project their hopes, their pain, their meaning onto your face, and they will follow, not out of fear, but out of love. You become their symbol, their savior, their mirror. And a man who sees himself in the mirror does not break it, he protects it. That is the genius of soft control. It does not resist you, it seduces you. You do not even realize you are being ruled, because it feels like you are ruling yourself. The people chant your name, but what they really celebrate is their own reflection. They are not loyal to you. They are loyal to the version of themselves that you've allowed them to see. Machiavelli knew that the true leader does not impose, they embody. They do not tell the people what to think. They allow the people to feel as if they thought of it first. And once the people believe it came from within, you cannot take it from them, because they will protect that illusion like it is their soul. Control becomes emotional. It becomes personal. They do not follow orders. They follow identity. They do not fight for you. They fight for the story they have written in their own mind. And once that story is tied to your presence, your voice, your image, then you own them completely. Not because you are powerful, but because you are familiar. They trust what looks like them, sounds like them, bleeds like them. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to reflect their fears and tell them it's not their fault. You only need to reflect their pain and tell them you'll fix it. That is how control deepens. Not with violence, but with intimacy. Not with fear, but with familiarity. Machiavelli wrote for the prince, but the lesson was always for the people. Beware the ruler who looks too much like you. Because once you fall in love with your reflection, you will never notice who is holding the mirror. Most people will never escape. That is the final truth. The chains are too familiar, the lies too comfortable, the illusion too complete. They were born into the script, raised by it, and now they defend it as if it were sacred. But a few, just a few, feel the fracture, a quiet discomfort, a splinter in the mind. They start to notice things, the silence between the noise, the pattern behind the chaos. They start to see that what they've been taught to fear is exactly where the truth lives, and once that door cracks open, it cannot be closed. Machiavelli never promised freedom. He only offered understanding, and understanding is the first wound, because once you see the system for what it is, you can never return to innocence. You see the scripts in every conversation, the programming in every belief. You hear the voice of the cage in your own thoughts. But this pain, this disillusionment, it is the beginning of power, real power, not the kind they sell you, not the illusion of choice or the costume of influence, but the quiet, permanent clarity that comes from no longer being fooled. Once you know the game, you stop playing by their rules. You stop reacting. You start designing. You speak less. You observe more. You move strategically, not out of fear, but out of control. You choose when to be seen and when to disappear. You become unreadable, untouchable, not because you are above it all, but because you've already walked through the fire and left your illusions behind. The escape does not come with applause. There is no ceremony, no reward. In fact, most will hate you for it. They will call you arrogant, cold, dangerous, because your clarity threatens their comfort. Your questions disturb their sleep. But this isolation is necessary, because to escape the controlled mind, you must first be willing to stand alone in the truth. Machiavelli understood that those who rule themselves are always a threat to those who rule others. So if you feel the pull, if your mind still itches in the silence, good. That means you haven't been fully broken. Not yet. That means you still have time to choose. Not comfort, not applause, but clarity. The hardest path, and the only one worth taking. You do not need to burn the system. You only need to stop feeding it. Stop giving it your belief, your attention, your loyalty. Reclaim your mind, and everything else will follow. Because in the end, control only works when you accept it. And once you stop accepting it, the whole illusion collapses. Quietly, without a sound, like a puppet that falls when the strings are cut. And the moment you stop being the puppet, you become the one holding the strings. If you've made it this far, you're no longer asleep. You've seen the strings. You've heard the silence between the noise. Now the question is simple. Will you keep playing the role they wrote for you, or will you start writing your own? The path of the controlled mind ends the moment you stop obeying without thought, and begins the moment you start questioning everything, including this.